So I don't know if you guys have ever seen a good horror movie before, a good scary movie, but essentially a great horror movie is one that keeps you on the edge of your seat the whole way through. And you're kind of like just waiting like, isn't this character just going to die? Won't they just die? And isn't this just going to be the end? And you're kind of like, biting your nails. And you're like, this is just so scary, right? Well, let me be very clear. The stock market is that scary character right now. And every moment we want the enemy to end, it is not ending. And there's some stuff that just transpired here that I want to show you guys, that things are going to get even worse. And it is so much worse than I think anybody really anticipated. And some of these numbers that just came out of a couple companies here in the last couple hours, these will have ripple effects way more than just their stock prices. These will bring down Goliath companies essentially over the coming months. And wow is all I have to say. And it's bad. It is so bad. Okay. Now I think everybody's seen obviously the NASDAQ over year to date. NASDAQ's been a complete disaster year to date. NASDAQ's down almost 17% year to date. We're not even halfway through the year yet, not even close to halfway through the year yet. To start out a year like this is awful, right? And I think it's going to get worse. I'll just be honest. I do think it is going to get worse, and actually quite a bit worse based upon what I'm seeing in some of these early numbers, coming out of some of these companies, and the ripple effect this is going to have on the entire market over the next couple quarters, okay? So the 17% could be a pretty number. If you pull up a 5-year on the Russell, I thought this was interesting. The Russell's only up 44% in the past 5 years. With all the stimulus pump, with all the money pumped out there, with all the progress companies have made, the Russell's only up 44%. And you know why? Because it has had a disastrous past year. The Russell's down in the past 1 year 11%. It's not very often you can go back in time and see time periods where the Russell was down 10% plus on a yearly basis. But we're in one of those time periods right now. And as undervalued as I believe small caps and mid caps are for long-term investors, and they are incredibly undervalued right now, it is very, very hard to predict a bottom here because of some of this news. This first story is really bad, and it's going to be a disaster for a lot of stocks. The next story I'm going to share with you after that is far worse and far scarier for a ton of stocks out there, okay? So, Corsair Gaming. Corsair Gaming is a company I personally own. This is a stock I personally own. CRSR, out of nowhere, out of complete nowhere, they just came out with preliminary unaudited revenue of $380 million. Now, I own a lot of stocks in the market, okay? I own several different stocks, and Corsair is just one of many stocks I own, right? And it's hard for me sometimes to keep, remember off the top of my head, like revenue expectations for a company and EPS expectations for quarter by quarter and things like that. But as soon as I saw that, I was like, wasn't Corsair supposed to do at least 400 something million in this quarter? And I'm like, 380, that doesn't sound right at all. And very rarely companies come out in preliminary announced numbers. And in order for you to come out in preliminary announced numbers, which by the way is a prudent move by the management team, that's actually a great move. I applaud the management team for that because some of these management teams sometimes try to let it go until the actual earnings. Instead of just getting the bad news out of the way, they try to sugarcoat it. So I applaud the management team. But I was thinking, man, this has to be a complete disaster. Isn't this like what was the number expected? And I looked it up. Almost $450 million was the expectation. Now, on a year-over-year basis, that's 15.5% down, right? And they just blew through the floor, essentially, coming in at 380. So it was already supposed to be a kind of a disastrous quarter, and that's longs like myself, we all expected it. Bears on the stock expected it. And it's so much worse, and I mean so much worse than I had anticipated, and honestly anybody had anticipated. Coming in at 380 is nothing short of extraordinary, nothing short of an extraordinary disaster, okay? And you read through this here, okay? And this is even kind of a little bit scarier. Revenue was lower than we expected, mainly due to short-term slowdown in consumer spending in Europe, said Andy Paul, chief executive. Andy Paul's been leading this company for like 100 years. Him and this management team, they will do everything possible to make this company successful, okay? They will do absolutely everything in their power. By the way, shout out to FTX US. I don't think I mentioned them at the beginning because I was so worried about getting this video started, but get up to $100 in free crypto. Use my referral code, Holy Smokers. Check that out, okay? As is now becoming generally apparent, inflation is higher than expected, and the Russia-Ukraine conflict has put a strain on consumer confidence, he added. He also said we are not expecting to show growth over the most recent Q1 2021, since that quarter contained stimulus checks and pent-up demand due to product shortages, aka don't get too excited too fast. Now, the next news I have to share with you is actually going to be much scarier and much worse than what you're just seeing there. But this is a disaster, okay? This is a clear, massive slowdown in spending. Now, if you don't know Corsair Gaming, they sell gaming equipment, they sell hardware, they sell streaming equipment like cameras and microphones and all those sorts of things, okay? And everybody, all of us bulls that are bulls in the stock, and even people, everybody expected numbers to be down 15, 16%, year over year. I mean, this is like 30% down or some insane number like that. No one expected that. This is a disaster. It was a complete short-term disaster for Corsair Gaming. Now, Corsair Gaming, don't get me wrong, that company's going to be just fine long-term, okay? And it's going to be a huge moneymaker stock long-term. But you got to diverge the short-term from the long-term in a situation like this, and you have to look at both situations realistically, right? Long-term, there's going to be a lot more hardware, and Corsair has great brands, and they just keep innovating, and they're going to do fine long-term. But short-term is a complete disaster, and we cannot sugarcoat that. I think it's very important not to sugarcoat that and call it the way it is. And what you're seeing in Corsair Gaming, you're going to see this in a lot more companies. Now, even worse than that, get ready for NVIDIA and get ready for AMD to fall big, okay? Corsair Gaming, essentially, they can start moving up in a big way, way before an AMD and an NVIDIA can move up, because they're kind of like the telltale sign to if the industry is growing really strong or not, right? And if you start seeing a flippening happening there, right, it's just a matter of time before that starts to hit NVIDIA and AMD. And so don't be surprised at all if NVIDIA and AMD fall massively over the next 3 to 6 months. And I mean massively. And so those are the sorts of stocks that move the entire market. Corsair Gaming, that's not moving the market. But what will move the market is a kind of a trickle up of the information of like, did you see how bad Corsair just missed earnings? What do you think is going to happen with all these companies selling GPUs and CPUs? It's not going to be good, man. It's going to be bad. And the worst part is, we could be 3 or 4 quarters from the bottom of where things might bottom out at for CPU and GPU. It's probably just like this upcoming guide's probably going to be really bad. The next one will probably be even worse. Companies like NVIDIA and AMD, they better get out ahead of this. If they don't get out ahead of this, they're going to set themselves up for much steeper and much bigger falls and much bigger disappointment. And with the management team over there, the executive team at Corsair Gaming, those guys are about as good as it gets. They're going to do everything in their power to try to make numbers and try to, beat numbers and those sorts of things. And but at the end of the day, if the money's not there, the money's not there. And anybody that's ever run a business before, and for those of you folks that have run businesses before, there's only so much that you can control. And especially if you're a massive corporation, it's not like Corsair Gaming can magically just make everybody go out there and buy more gaming equipment and streaming equipment and things like that. If there's a massive pullback and massive shift in consumer spending, right, that's not magically going to be fixed by some move the executive team's going to make. That's out of their power at the end of the day. And so this is a big dilemma that goes way further than just Corsair Gaming. Now, it gets even worse, and actually much worse, okay? So if you didn't see, Snapchat reported after the bell as well. They missed profit expectations. They missed revenue expectations. But way worse than this, okay, is the company's daily users grew. It grew 18% annually, which was more than expected. So they have more people using it than expected, but they still ended up missing on profit and sales, okay? Which means companies just aren't spending to advertise on Snapchat the way folks expect it. And that's very, very, very troubling, okay? Look at this here. The Snapchat CFO, Derek Anderson, sounds like a QB name, said that other conditions affecting advertising customers, including supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, inflation, and the impact of rising interest rates. Snap could continue to face challenging operating environment that leads customers to pause their campaigns or reduce advertising budgets, Anderson said in his prepared remarks, okay? Now, that's That's scary, okay? Because Snapchat's a pretty big company nowadays, and their customers are basically everybody that does business out there, right? And so if he's talking about customers pausing advertising campaigns, that means companies just aren't hitting numbers and they just don't have those sorts of ad budgets, right? And so think about it from the context of a Corsair Gaming, right? Corsair Gaming, disaster, complete disaster here in the short term. So if you're Corsair Gaming, the money's just not out there. Do you really want to go out there and advertise when the money's not out there anyways? No, because you're not going to get the positive ROI. It doesn't matter how many ads Corsair Gaming puts out there right now. If the money's not out there, the money's not available, right? And so Corsair could run all these ads and lose a bunch of money. It doesn't make sense, right? If the money's not out there, you don't go ahead and spend a big advertising budget behind that. You spend big advertising budgets when business is good and when the money's out there, because you're like, I can get a great ROI on these ads. I can get, if I do, let's say $10 of ad spend, I'm gonna get $20 back from that, or $15 back from that, or $30, $40 back from that, right? That's when you want to advertise heavy. But if the money's not there, there's no point in trying to spend all that money advertising, right? And so this is a huge, huge deal, not just for, once again, Snapchat. It's a way bigger thing than that, okay? So if we pull up the big tech watch list I have, right, which contains Shopify, NVIDIA, Facebook, PayPal, Netflix, AMD, Amazon, Intuit, Google, Adobe, Microsoft, Apple, and Tesla, which you can't see here, okay? I basically kind of put on the side of them like what companies will end up being negatively affected by this, right? Apple, Corsair Gaming, what they just came out and said, that those are sorts of things that will end up hurting Apple, right? If people aren't spending money on gaming equipment and computers and those sorts of things, it's going to end up hitting Apple. I guarantee you. If Corsair Gaming has that disaster of a quarter, it's just a matter of time before Apple starts to say, hey, you know what? People maybe aren't quite buying those iPhones the way we thought they were, or the new Macs, or the new iPads, or whatever, right? So be very, very careful about what Apple could potentially say on their earnings call, right? Snapchat's something that obviously very negatively affects Google. Now, the only good news with Google is, for like Google search, is if there's less people using, let's say, the internet, for instance, because everybody was at home and they're not using Google as much, ad rates go up, so that's a good thing for them, right? But at the end of the day, if advertisers just aren't spending as much, they pull back, and so they don't spend there, right? Amazon, Corsair Gaming, that's obviously something that's negatively affecting Amazon. People aren't spending that money on the gaming equipment. They're not spending money on a lot of other things that could be bought through something like Amazon. So that negatively affects them. AMD, big time, we just spoke about that. PayPal, negatively affected by something like a Corsair Gaming there. Snapchat definitely could affect Facebook very negatively if advertisers are pausing campaigns or pulling back on spending, right? It's not great news for Facebook, I can tell you that much. NVIDIA, obviously very negatively hit by something like a Corsair Gaming here. And a Shopify would be something more Snapchat, right? It could also be Corsair Gaming as well. And think about the amount of businesses that have been created, small ones specifically in stores and things like that, created on Shopify, right? And if people aren't getting good ad spend, then maybe they're not going to use Shopify, especially some of the weaker businesses, right? Because not everything that's on Shopify is a legit, sustainable, long-term business. A lot of people set up Shopify stores that maybe just have a little arbitrage on Facebook going or something like that, right? Now, in just a moment, I want to share with you guys if I'm going to stop buying stocks and start just holding cash or selling stocks or things like that. I'm going to share my perspective in just a moment here. But I thought this was worth mentioning. I thought it was really worth mentioning. Somebody, mentioned it actually in a comment on a video I came out with earlier today on the channel, essentially, right? And they said, and I thought it was a great point, they said, isn't it funny how Tesla, 3 or 4 years ago was seen as one of the most dangerous, scary stocks in the stock market. And now it's, the stock that might be holding up best in this market, right? And I thought that was so accurate because I was like, wow, isn't that funny how the market can change over time, where a stock like Tesla, in a matter of 3 or 4 years, has taken themselves from being like the scariest stock in the market, and they're going to go bankrupt, to actually this company that's now like money wants to flood to. In a time like now, that's just crazy. And that's the stock market for you. 'Cause some of these companies can pull off amazing things and go from you're the most dangerous kid on the block to the next thing you know, you're seen as the safety. And it's incredible, but it absolutely is. Okay. Now, let's talk about things for a moment here in my perspective on buying stocks, not buying stocks, and things like that. Okay. So 2022, what I've said kind of going into this year is it's a once in a, let's call it, decade type year, where every once in a while you get like an entire year to just add stocks for cheaper pricing than you ever believed possible. And that's what it's represented to me, and that's exactly what it continues to represent to me. Now, where I think people are going to get into trouble this year is trying to hope like the bottom comes, right? And what you're seeing is companies' earnings deteriorate, revenue deteriorate, net income deteriorate, margins deteriorate. For most companies, some companies are doing better than ever, but some of those companies could start getting hit in the back half of this year too, so don't get too excited about all that, okay? But essentially, don't hope like magically next quarter or the quarter after we're going to have a turn, because sometimes you can get these periods to last quite some time. And so the way I look at this is I'm just focused on adding shares of companies that I love for the long term. If that's a Corsair Gaming, it's Corsair Gaming. If it's a Tattooed Chef, if it's an Honest, if it's a PayPal, if it's a Meta, if Netflix was to fall to $100-something, maybe I pick up that stock, and Shopify, if that baby keeps falling, next thing you know, it's like $350, something like that, right? I look at this year as just an accumulating shares of companies that you love for the long term, essentially. But I'm not getting my hopes up that we're at a bottom, that we're going to hit a bottom, because all I see is things getting worse, and actually quite a bit worse for companies. And that could continue on for potentially at least a quarter, if not several quarters to go in the future. Real estate is the next possible thing to really start falling, in my opinion, starting in the summertime. And we'll see what happens with that, man. And the Fed is in a real pickle right now because inflation's been going crazy. So they could still try to keep having interest rates go up while the economy is getting far worse. And I think the Fed should be listening to what these companies have to say on their earnings. I don't think they're going to be listening. And I think that's an issue. I think they're very, very caught up into raising rates. And they're just going to be focused on that, and trying to kill off inflation. And they're going to potentially end up adding more fuel to the recession fire. And that means companies, worse revenue, worse guidance, worse net income, worse everything. Hope you guys enjoyed this as always. Check out first link in the description. As always, much love and have a great day.